We're now joined by Dan Perry, who's the former editor-in-chief of the Associate Press's Europe, West Asia and Africa regions. He's in Tel Aviv. Dan, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks very much for joining us today. Now, what do you make of these statements from the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman Majid Al-Ansari? He said that the international community needs to step up, and he has also said that Israel is delaying the implementation of the Gaza peace plan. Your thoughts on some of his statements?
My thoughts are that the main sticking point in implementing the Gaza peace plan was that Hamas never really accepted the critical point, which was that it would fully, irreversibly disarm and give up control over Gaza. And everything that we're seeing since then is more or less a function of that. Now, the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman is technically right that Israel is holding up the current stage because Israel hasn't confirmed that it agrees, basically. So that's kind of indisputable. Is Israel right in maintaining this position? It's a mixed bag, because the original 20 or 21 point plan called for Israel to withdraw from all of Gaza, but also called for Hamas to disarm, and didn't really establish the order of events. So Israel's position that it cannot withdraw from effectively the buffer zone around what remains the Hamas-controlled interior of Gaza until Hamas is no longer a threat, I don't see that as ridiculous at all. Israel's basic position is that they need to stay until Hamas is fully disarmed. The idea presented by the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman that Israel should just withdraw no matter what from all occupied areas is absolutely preposterous. I mean, Hamas really has the intention of attacking Israel, so they clearly need a buffer zone as long as Hamas is there. Hamas's presence as a threat to Israel, not theoretical but highly kinetic threat, is the reason for the entire devastating, catastrophic 3 years of the war. And so I think Israel's right in insisting that Hamas first be disarmed. Unfortunately, the situation becomes more complicated still, because Israel objects to certain modalities about the Hamas disarming. For example, it looks like the agreement that they have reached is Hamas handing over heavy weapons, maybe all weapons, not clear, but heavy weapons into depots that will stay in Gaza. Israel wants these weapons removed from Gaza and destroyed. And also, Israel doesn't want anything remaining in the hands of Hamas, not pistols and not a slingshot. So, is Israel right or wrong to be so suspicious? Are these quibbles? That starts to become a bit of a gray zone. In general, Qatar is an interesting case because undoubtedly they have been a mediator and they've tried to play a mediator role, but they've also been strong supporters of Hamas. And they are rightly suspected of having pro-Hamas sympathies. Now, you could argue at the same time that the U.S. is a supporter of Israel and has pro-Israel sympathies, and one is left with the fundamental question: are Israel a democratic country facing threat, and Hamas, a terrorist organization, an enemy to its own people, constituting the threat? Are they equivalent forces morally? And obviously that's a huge discussion that animates much of the political discourse in the West. I have my view, and it favors Israel over Hamas.
Dan, stay with us. We will be rejoining with you very briefly. Spain has described European Union talks on the migration crisis in Ceuta as constructive, rejecting claims that the dispute put the Schengen-free travel area at risk. Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska said Schengen was never in danger and insisted that the situation had not threatened Spain's place within the border-free zone. The emergency meeting brought together EU interior and migration ministers after several countries, including Italy and Denmark, criticised Madrid's handling of the Ceuta migration crisis. During the discussions, member states expressed solidarity with Spain while also calling for stronger control of the European Union's external borders. Ministers agreed on the need for a tougher approach against illegal migration, greater cooperation with countries of origin, and more support for border agency Frontex. Belgium also called for increased resources for border security and stronger action against human smugglers. The meeting ended with EU members seeking a balance between supporting frontline countries and strengthening Europe's migration controls. Let's listen in to what Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska has said.
Volviendo al Consejo High que hemos celebrado, extraordinario, referir cómo todas las intervenciones de todos los Estados miembros, también de los Estados asociados a Schengen, así como de las agencias de la Unión Europea, ha sido en un tono absolutamente constructivo, en un tono donde se ha reconocido igualmente el trabajo extraordinario, la respuesta eficaz e inmediata de las autoridades españolas ante una crisis de tal entidad.
Dan, coming back to you now, we have seen, of course, the last couple of events over the past couple of days unfold, and the reaction that this has led to within the leadership in the EU. Now, from a policy perspective, is there anything the EU can do to perhaps reduce some of those push factors that are leading to the migration of people out of some of those countries when the pull factors are so strong in terms of employment prospects in the EU? Regardless of humanitarian reasons, some of these migrants have cited that they were looking for better employment opportunities in parts of the EU. How do you think the EU should best manage their response to the implications of the last couple of days?
That's the question of the hour and the question of the century. The EU has to weigh how it views a fundamental trade-off. There is no doubt that the European Union does not have replacement level fertility rates. Replacement level is 2.1 per woman. They're flirting with 1.3, in some countries 1.4. So the population is going to shrink. The proportion of old people and pensioners is going to increase. Workers paying taxes is going to decrease. The countries will be poorer unless they either massively and quickly increase their fertility or they bring in workers from outside. But then the question becomes, do you value your existing culture? If you bring in people from other cultures, then, Spain will no longer be Spain. That'll be something else, Japan maybe. Does Spain want to be Japan? Does Spain want to be Arabia? It's not so clear. Now, the far left in all these countries will say that borders are fundamentally wrong and they're archaic relics of nationalism and that the idea of preserving your culture is inherently racist. They confuse race for ideas because the immigration all over Europe comes largely from Muslim countries where demonstratively, indisputably, basic attitudes towards gays, towards women, towards religion and the centrality of religion, towards liberal values is clearly different and sometimes dramatically and violently at odds with the liberal democratic values that prevail in Europe that stem back to the Renaissance and hail from Enlightenment values. Do you want to give those up in order to satisfy an economic need and a labor market need? This is the fundamental thing. And that really is a choice. Now, when the Americans associated with the MAGA movement, President Trump and J.D. Vance, start accusing Europe of being willing to give up their own civilization, they're a little bit behind the times, and they're not so fair, because whereas Europe really did have something close to extremely liberal, not open borders, but very liberal attitudes towards letting in immigrants from the developing world 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, they no longer do. Europe has put up a very big fence, basically. The issue of Spain is interesting because Spain has the only land border with mainland Africa and Ceuta and Melilla, these enclaves that occasionally face so-called invasion by Moroccans and others, and therefore is vulnerable. But the idea that once you reach Ceuta or Melilla, you simply can enter Europe because you're going to get asylum and that's it. Schengen means you can go anywhere or end up in Paris is basically false, because they're not part of the Schengen zone, and Spain has no intention of giving everyone Spanish citizenship. They really were vulnerable, and they were treated, I think, rather harshly in recent days when all of Europe ganged up against them. On the other hand, it's also true that Spain currently has a left and even far left government of Pedro Sanchez that has been way more liberal than the rest of Europe in this regard. For example, by offering essentially asylum to illegals in Spain, and they thought that would apply to 500,000 earlier this year. It ended up attracting applications from well over 1 million, and they probably, mostly, if not all, actually suffice to be accepted, and those people really can proceed straight to Frankfurt or the rest of the EU because of Schengen. So there's a very big issue here. Spain is a bit of an outlier in this regard, not because of Ceuta, where most of the people who breached the border have been returned, and there was never a real danger that they end up in mainland Spain, but in general, because of the fact that the Sanchez government, I think, is inclined, when it comes to the trade-off I mentioned before, to break on the side of the labor market need, and it's no big deal, and diversity is always good. And I do not think that this applies across the board in terms of public opinion in Europe. And if Europe actually does follow that lead, I'm pretty sure the result is going to be far-right movements coming to power in Germany, France, and also Britain, even though Britain's no longer part of the EU.
Dan, always a pleasure to have you with us on NewsX World. Thank you very much for joining us today.